Hello, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to this episode of the Compression Thinking series. My name is Ethan Barry, and I'm joined by Robert Doc Hall, co-founder of the Compression Institute and professor emeritus at the Indiana University Kelley School of Business. Doc's career started in engineering and manufacturing, which ultimately led to his realization that current business models are contributing to the destruction of our planet. How do we change? How do we adapt to a changing environment? These are the questions Doc has been asking his entire career, and this series is about how you can help to shift the dangerous paradigm causing these problems by making nature a stakeholder in your business or community. To do this, we need to change our values, which means we need to change the way we think. If you enjoy this series, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Doing so helps us spread this program to more people and more communities who may benefit from the message. Now, you may be wondering what we mean when we say compression. Well, in the context of this podcast, compression is a reference to the squeeze we are putting on nature. To ease the compression of nature, we need to compress the way we live. Compression thinking is a guide to help us cope and adapt to the changes ahead. How do you become a compression thinker? Well, you'll just have to keep listening to find out. So this is the first one of these we're doing, Doc. We're going to be doing a 12-part series. This is number 1. Might help our audience if we introduce ourselves first. Doc, could you tell us a little bit about yourself?
I was with the Kelley School of Business for about 33 years. Taught operations management, that is how stuff works, more or less. Did engineering work for a few years before that, and then I discovered, the academic world and got into that. But nearly all that time, I was working a lot with manufacturing people that made things. And sometime late 70s, kind of by accident, I got involved with what then was called Japanese manufacturing, and then lean manufacturing, lean operations, and, that's blossomed into its own little mini thing now, and probably pursued that about 30 years. But the real trigger question in all that was the definition of waste according to the Toyota production system, or lean. Waste is anything that's done that the customer would not pay for if they knew about it. And it began to occur to me that what we were really doing was becoming very efficient, enabling customers to waste far more than they ever had. And so that definition needed to be broadly expanded, and then it led to many other things. So that's me. What's your background, Ethan?
Well, I'm a 23-year-old college student studying psychology, among other things. Born and raised in Huntington, West Virginia. Moved to Texas probably when I was 18. Took a couple years off between college and high school to figure out what I wanted to do, and now I'm here doing this podcast with you, Doc. How I got interested in the subject of environmentalism and just the kind of things we talk about on this podcast is directly related to my experiences growing up in where I did. I was surrounded by nature, and as I got older, I just witnessing the way people kind of take it for granted. There was a logging operation across the road from where my grandpa lived, and that place I used to spend a lot of time as a kid was just transformed into this barren wasteland, all the biodiversity, the deers, squirrels, everything that used to live there was gone, and that kind of opened up my eyes to this whole area. And then through our discussions, Doc, it's become intensified as of late. I grew up in a very poor environment also. And when you grow up in a place like that, it doesn't take long till you start to get the sense that the people living these sorts of lives are the ones that have to deal with the consequences of these actions, right? Relating it back to the environment, it's the leaders of industry who have perpetuated the issues that we discuss on this podcast, but mostly they have the money to buy their way out of trouble. The kind of people that I grew up around didn't. But what is compression thinking, Doc? Because that's why we're here today. We're here to talk about that. How does compression thinking help communities?
Well, our contention is that we need to think about what to do, alleviate the pressure, the squeeze we put on nature. We put a lot of them on nature. And to do that, we need to compress our footprints of living. That's a common phrase, the resources we use. And our problem is not necessarily we have 7 or 8 billion people in the world. It's in total what we do to nature and how much stuff we consume that has such an effect on nature. Kind of a beginning part of this is how huge this squeeze is. And so, talk about, the ozone hole. People probably heard about it. Maybe that's over. No, it's not over. It is not continuing to increase, but it's not over. It could reopen. That's the ozone hole over Antarctica. There's a little one over the North Pole, too. There are all kinds of other dangers. Some people emphasize, disposal of nuclear waste or nuclear weapons. We could do ourselves in with those things easily. In fact, any war that's being fought is generally not terribly observant of the environment or improving it in any way whatever. Then there's a lot more. The topsoil is degrading, it's eroding, it's decreasing its nutrient value. We have runoff problems leading to dead zones, a big one at the mouth of the Mississippi, but it's far from the only one in the world. All kinds of pollutants that have been widely distributed. One of them that doesn't get much attention is an endocrine disruptor. And what does that do? Well, it affects any one of your glandular systems, and if one of them happened over a long period of time to disrupt the glands considerably, it might affect, kidneys, and the one that grabs attention is the sexual organs. And so, could that happen? Yes. Water, we either have way too much or we don't have any, and we have droughts. Sewage is a problem in places.
That list has already gotten so large, I can't even keep track.
I'm only halfway through.
And that's the problem, isn't it?
Yeah, and you see, we hadn't even brought up climate change.
The one that kind of exacerbates everything, right?
Yes. So, yes, is that bad? Yes. All those are interconnected, and there's a long string.
Just initially, hearing all those things, you got to think it's a depressing message. How are you supposed to stay hopeful with all this going on?
Well, that's partly what we got into compression thinking about, and beginning with sort of it's been called a crisis of perception. A lot's going on, and ears don't hear, eyes don't see, because we see them through the transactional lens of the current economy. You start talking about some of these issues, and first question is, how much is it going to cost? And so, yeah, you can translate somewhat what's happening into monetary consequences and put a number of some kind on it. But to really deal with it, you got to get beyond that box in which our thinking's trapped, and let's call that compression thinking.
What do you think caused this crisis?
Well, we had the Industrial Revolution. Before that, we had European, particularly colonial expansion. The world looked like it was just infinite. And yet today, you go someplace like West Texas and you look out there and there's nothing and a lot more than nothing. You'd say the world just goes on forever. You look at it from space and obviously it doesn't. And we've been able to disturb nature enough now that it's a serious problem. But our traditional business and economic thinking is expansionary, meaning we talk in terms of compound annual growth rate. That's a business phrase. Compound interest, we all live with that. Bank account uses it. Compound interest assumes that in general, we're going to keep expanding. You say this can't happen anymore, and you have upended the logic of the current system. And you know there are limits. Oh, just for instance, 10 years ago, saw where the annual consumption of various kinds of colas in the United States was 50 gallons per person. That's everybody from birth to death. You can't drink any more than that. You can't keep expanding.
Yeah, so compression thinking isn't so much a how-to guide of solving these problems. It's more like a method to help you see the problems from a clearer perspective, not through this expansion lens, because that's kind of what we're all used to up to this point, isn't it?
Well, it's the way we live. If you were born into that kind of the world, that's what you think the world is, and maybe even how it always was, and it's not true. And it can be very depressing. People that really recognize this, and there aren't very many, but they're called the cassandras or something, and maybe shunned by society because we don't want to think about this stuff. And they will say, well, some of them will say, well, forget it, we're all doomed. Some of them will say, well, maybe if we're lucky, a little remnant of humanity might make it into the 21st century somewhere. This contention is if we can change how we think, many of us will survive because we made a huge change in our thinking.
And to help us make that change in thinking, you've prepared 4 guidelines for people to kind of keep in the back of their mind. Can you give listeners a little bit of what to expect?
Well, the first one's a continuation of what we've just been saying. Earth is finite. Everything in it or on it is also finite. The limits of what we can tap or use may be a little vague at times, but they're there. You cannot keep increasing consumption by doubling, for instance, every 20 to 30 years, and do that indefinitely. Something has to give. Now, when would that give occur? Well, I'm not going to be foolish enough to try to forecast a day, an hour, or something, but it's there. And that's what we need to do something about. And it isn't just the extraction of stuff from Earth or too much energy being poured into the Earth. It's what do you do with this stuff at the end of its useful life? I've referred to the house, our house, as just a place where ore in the ground is used for a little while in the house, and then we take it out to the landfill. And that's why we have to stop. That was just one. The second one is symbiotic thinking. That's systems thinking, which has been around for a long time. That's looking at systems as a whole and adding some more to it. Looking at all those relationships, trying to figure out how systems work. And don't bound the system. It's not just some little part of a factory or some little business process. Include the effects that you are having on nature and maybe that nature has on you in every decision or consequence. That's symbiotic thinking, recognizing that you're symbiotic with all other life on Earth. That's what it is. Another one, organize for learning. If we're going to continue as a species, humans have to organize to learn how things work or make them work differently pretty quickly. Being efficient may not be anywhere near as important as doing the right thing. Organize for learning. Nature itself is incredibly efficient at times when it has to be. Otherwise, it doesn't need to be efficient. Maybe we can learn from that. The last one is quality over quantity, where quality is an expanded definition too. Quality of all life, because we depend on it. If we want quality life, we need to be surrounded by quality of life because, everything you eat was once alive, or almost everything. So we depend on that. And we've gotten to the point where taking care of nature is up to us. It can't take care of itself without us letting it do it, getting off its back, so to speak.
How do you predict people will react to hearing some of these messages?
Well, my first prediction is most will ignore it like they do most everything else. But maybe some will sit up and take a little notice and join with us. So we're really talking in a large sense about different business models, maybe nature's business model. If you go into business, a lot's happening. Not everything's a for-profit corporation or company. Some of them are nonprofits. The Compression Institute's nonprofit. Then there are B corporations and related kinds of legal categories.
And one of the ways we're wrestling with these issues is through open, honest dialogue with the people who are listening to this podcast. We plan teleconferences that are going to correspond to each of these episodes. Doc, could you speak a little bit to that?
What we're interested in is your thoughts, your situation where you are, how we can pitch in and actually make some changes of the kinds that are needed. And so everybody's surrounding ecology is a little bit different. Everybody's life circumstance is a little bit different. Where you are is not where I am. We can share a good deal, and we're very interested in these teleconferences leading to the formation of learning groups. You learn where you are, we can learn among ourselves. How do we make such a huge change? But now you ought to realize this is an emotional change. It isn't just intellectually understanding something a different way and then we go on.
Well, I look forward to participating in these teleconferences with you, Doc, and hearing from our audience and finding out what it is they're facing and in their communities. Because I'm sure once we all start to come together, we're going to realize that we're all dealing with similar things, you know what I mean? So hopefully we'll be able to learn from each other. But before we end this podcast, it might pay for us to go over the roadmap of what people can expect from this series. The Compression Thinking series, it's going to be a 12-part podcast created to help you see the flaws in our current thinking and how we interact with the world. We'll start off by diving deep into the 4 guidelines to compression thinking. Then we'll discuss some of the most complicated issues facing our society and try to analyze them from a clearer perspective. Some of the topics we'll be discussing are healthcare, waste in the fashion industry, and how we change, the process of changing. Accompanying this series is going to be a bunch of live teleconferences that you can take part in to help kickstart the dialogue in your own communities. And that's a wrap, folks. If you enjoyed listening to this, please feel free to join us in our weekly teleconferences where we discuss the problems you and your community are facing while trying to think of possible solutions. The problems we're up against are way too large for any one person to tackle on their own. It takes all of us coming together. These dialogue sessions happen every Tuesday. You can participate by calling the number provided on our webpage. Times, topics, and the number to call are all found under the Compression Thinking Series tab on our website, www.compression.org. Also, please do not forget to like, share, comment, and subscribe. If we're going to make a dent in some of the issues we discussed today, it will take all of us coming together, and your support helps. I know it feels as if we've merely scratched the surface of this topic, so if you're interested in learning more, you can check out Doc's many papers, videos, and book reviews at the same website, www.compression.org. Thanks for listening, everyone.